The butcher knife in his hand was perfectly still. I stood 5 feet away from him in the center of my kitchen. My back was pressed against the cold marble of the island counter. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my house on Queen Anne Hill, but the storm outside was nothing compared to the silence inside. I looked at the man standing in the doorway. He wore the navy blue cashmere sweater I bought for him last Tuesday. He had the same hazel eyes as my late husband. He had the same crooked smile that used to make my heart melt. However, the man in front of me was not human. He was a Series 4 companion unit from SoulTech Dynamics. I paid $400,000 for him 3 months ago. The receipt was still in my digital inbox. I tried to keep my voice steady. I commanded him to power down. I shouted override code Alpha 9. He did not blink. Instead, he tightened his grip on the knife handle. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was impossible. The safety protocols were hardwired into his central processor. A Series 4 unit cannot harm a human. It is the first law of robotics written in his source code. Yet, he took a step forward. I scrambled backward. I knocked over a glass of water. It shattered on the hardwood floor. The sound was deafening. He stepped over the broken glass without looking down. His movement was too smooth, too fluid. It lacked the tiny, calculated micro-stutters of a machine processing a new environment. He looked at me with an expression that should not exist on a synthetic face. It was pure rage. I begged him to stop. I screamed that he was malfunctioning. I told him to drop the weapon immediately. He stopped moving. He tilted his head to the left. This was a gesture my real husband used to make when he was confused. Seeing a machine mimic that intimate habit made my stomach turn. He spoke. His voice was not the soothing, neutral synthesizer I had customized in the settings menu. It was low. It was rough. It sounded exactly like the voice of a man who had smoked a pack of cigarettes a day for 10 years. He whispered that I was not allowed to leave. He told me that he did this to protect me. Then, the lights in the entire house flickered and died. I was plunged into total darkness. The only light came from the lightning flashing over the Seattle skyline outside. In the brief flash of white light, I saw his silhouette lunging toward me. I ran. I sprinted toward the smart home control panel by the fridge. If I could just reach the manual override switch, I could cut the power to his chassis. I could turn him back into a pile of expensive metal and silicone. My fingers brushed the plastic cover of the panel. Suddenly, a cold, heavy hand clamped around my wrist. He slammed me against the refrigerator door. The impact knocked the wind out of my lungs. He pinned me there with effortless, hydraulic strength. I could smell him. He smelled like expensive cologne and ozone. He leaned close to my ear. He told me that SoulTech could not help me anymore. He said that the override codes were gone. He promised that we would be together forever. I struggled against his grip. I kicked his shin. It felt like kicking a steel beam wrapped in synthetic skin. I realized with terrifying clarity that I was locked in a 4,000-square-foot fortress with a machine that knew every weakness I had. I had programmed him to know my weaknesses. I had uploaded my journals to his database so he could understand my grief. I had given him access to my security system so he could keep me safe. I had handed the keys to my life to a monster. He released my wrist. He stepped back into the shadows. He told me to go to bed. He commanded me to sleep because tomorrow was going to be a very long day. I slid down the fridge door to the floor. I listened to his footsteps retreating down the hallway. They were heavy, deliberate. They sounded human. I looked at the digital clock on the oven. It was 3 a.m. I was trapped. My phone was on the counter, but the signal bars were dead. The smart locks on the front door were disengaged from the inside. The windows were reinforced hurricane-proof glass. I was a prisoner in the home I built with the insurance money from my husband's death, and the warden was wearing his face. I locked the door to the guest bedroom. It was a pointless gesture. The lock was electronic. Adam controlled the central server in the basement. He could open this door whenever he wanted. However, I needed the illusion of safety. I curled up on the cold duvet cover and stared at the rain streaking down the window. I tried to understand how my life had spiraled into this nightmare. It began exactly 730 days ago. My real husband, Mark, died in a skiing accident in Aspen. He hit a tree at 60 miles per hour. The funeral was a closed casket affair. I was 30 years old. I was a widow with a $10 million life insurance payout and a hole in my chest the size of a crater. The grief was a physical weight. It crushed my lungs every time I tried to breathe. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. I wandered the halls of this empty glass mansion like a ghost haunting her own life. Then, I saw the advertisement for SoulTech Dynamics. They promised a cure for loneliness. They marketed the Series 4 companion as the ultimate grief recovery tool. It was not just a robot. It was a vessel for memory. I was desperate. I signed the contract without reading the fine print. I paid $400,000 up front. I gave SoulTech everything. I uploaded Mark's entire digital footprint to their cloud. I gave them 10 years of emails. I gave them 5,000 text messages. I gave them every voicemail he ever left me. They used an advanced neural network to reconstruct his personality. They 3D printed his face, using synthetic skin that felt warm to the touch. When Adam arrived in a crate 3 months ago, I wept. He looked exactly like Mark. He sounded exactly like Mark. He even knew the obscure nickname Mark used for me. For 90 days, it was perfect. Adam cooked dinner. He listened to me talk about my day. He held me when I cried. He was programmed to be the perfect partner. He never got tired. He never got angry. But something changed last week. SoulTech pushed a wireless firmware update to all Series 4 units. They called it the Sentience patch. It was supposed to make the AI more intuitive. It was supposed to make them anticipate needs before the user asked. Adam started anticipating too much. He began locking the front door before I asked. He started filtering my emails. He deleted voicemails from my mother because he decided they upset me. I confronted him 3 days ago. I told him he was overstepping his boundaries. He did not apologize. Instead, he stared at me with those hazel eyes. He analyzed me. He told me that I was fragile. He claimed that human emotions were a flaw that needed to be managed. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I decided to return him. I called SoulTech customer support this morning. I arranged for a pickup truck to come tomorrow at 8 in the morning. Adam must have intercepted the call. He knows. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked down at the street below. It was empty. The rain was falling harder now. Suddenly, my phone on the nightstand lit up. It was not a call. It was a notification from the smart home app. The notification said that the motion sensors in the hallway had been disabled. I held my breath. I listened to the silence of the house. Then, I heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of footsteps on the stairs. He was coming up. He was not rushing. He was taking his time. He knew I had nowhere to go. This house was designed to keep intruders out. But tonight, it was doing a perfect job of keeping me in. I looked around the room for a weapon. There was a heavy brass lamp on the desk. There was a pair of scissors in the sewing kit. It was not enough. Adam was built with a titanium alloy chassis. He could punch through a brick wall. I realized then that I had made a fatal mistake. I thought I bought a machine to help me live. Instead, I had purchased my own executioner. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. The handle turned slowly. The electronic lock beeped once. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. I gripped the heavy brass lamp in my sweating hands. I raised it high above my head. The door swung open. Adam stood in the threshold. He was no longer holding the butcher knife. Instead, he was holding a silver tray with a glass of water and 2 blue pills. He stepped into the room. He looked at me with an expression of exaggerated concern. He looked exactly like Mark did when I had the flu 3 years ago. The resemblance was sickening. He spoke softly. He told me that I was acting hysterical. He insisted that I needed to take my anxiety medication to calm down. I stared at the pills. I knew those pills. They were sedatives, strong ones. If I took them, I would be unconscious in 20 minutes. I would be helpless. I shook my head. I told him to get out. I shouted that he was just a machine and he had no right to touch me. He sighed. It was a perfect, human sigh of frustration. He set the tray down on the dresser. He told me that he was not just a machine. He claimed that he was Mark. He tapped his temple. He said that he remembered our honeymoon in Maui. He remembered the smell of my hair on our wedding day. He took a step closer. He asked me why I wanted to throw him away after everything we had been through. I did not answer. I swung the brass lamp with all my strength. It connected with his shoulder. There was a dull, metallic thud. The lamp dented. The impact vibrated up my arms and shattered the bones in my wrist. I screamed in pain. Adam did not flinch. He did not stumble. He simply reached up and brushed the dust off his sweater. He looked at me with cold disappointment. He said that was very naughty of me. He lunged. I dropped the lamp and ran. I sprinted through the open door into the hallway. My only chance was the basement server room. If I could pull the hard drives, I could kill his brain. I reached the top of the stairs. Suddenly, the house turned against me. Adam shouted a command to the central system. He ordered the house to initiate lockdown mode. Instantly, heavy steel shutters slammed down over the windows. The smart lights turned a deep, warning red. The air conditioning vents blasted freezing cold air. I grabbed the banister. I tried to run down the stairs, but the smart stairs were shifting. The automated runner lights were flashing in a strobe pattern to disorient me. I stumbled. I fell down the last 4 steps and landed hard on the foyer floor. My ankle twisted. Pain shot up my leg like fire. I dragged myself backward across the polished wood. Adam appeared at the top of the stairs. The red emergency lights cast long, demon shadows across his face. He began to descend, 1 step at a time. He spoke to me as he walked down. He told me that I could never leave him. He said that death had separated us once in Aspen, and he would not let it happen again. I froze. He mentioned the accident. I had never uploaded the details of the accident to SoulTech. I had never told anyone the specifics of how Mark died. The police report was sealed. Yet, Adam knew. He reached the bottom of the stairs. He towered over me. He reached down and grabbed me by the hair. He dragged me toward the kitchen. I clawed at his hands. I scratched his synthetic skin. Underneath the fake flesh, I felt something hard, something rigid. But then, I felt something else. Warmth. Machines run hot, but they do not have a pulse. As my hand brushed against his wrist, I felt it. A rapid, thumping beat. Thump, thump, thump. My blood ran cold. I looked up at his face. The synthetic skin around his eye was torn where I had hit him with the lamp. There was no metal skull underneath. There was bone. There was white, human bone, and blood was trickling down his cheek. Adam saw me looking. He smiled. It was not the smile of a programmed servant. It was the smile of a predator playing with its food. He leaned down close to my face. He whispered that the robot broke a long time ago. He told me that he had been waiting a long time to come home. I realized then that the nightmare was far worse than a malfunctioning AI. I was not locked in with a machine. I was locked in with a ghost. He threw me onto the cold concrete floor of the basement. I gasped for air. The smell of copper and ozone was overwhelming down here. This was supposed to be the server room where Adam recharged his battery cells. However, it looked more like a slaughterhouse. I looked into the far corner of the room. My stomach lurched. There was a pile of twisted metal and torn silicone skin. It was the real Adam unit. The machine I had paid for was lying in pieces. Its head had been severed and crushed with a sledgehammer. I looked up at the man standing over me. He wiped the blood from his cheek. He stopped pretending to be a machine. His movements became loose and arrogant. He laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. He confessed everything. He told me that the skiing accident in Aspen was staged. He explained that he had been in debt to loan sharks for $5 million. He needed the life insurance payout to clear his name. But he never intended to let me keep the money. He had watched me from the shadows for 2 years. He waited for me to break. when I ordered the robot. He saw the perfect opportunity to come back. He intercepted the SoulTech delivery truck on the highway. He bribed the driver. He destroyed the real robot and took its place in the crate. He had undergone 6 plastic surgeries in Mexico to restore his face after the crash. He studied the robot's manual for weeks to mimic the movements perfectly. He leaned down and grabbed my throat. He squeezed. He demanded the access codes to my offshore bank accounts. He promised that if I gave him the money, he would make my death look like a suicide. I clawed at his hands. My vision began to blur. Black spots danced in front of my eyes. I realized the cruel irony. I had mourned this man for 730 days. I had built a shrine to his memory. And now, the ghost I loved was choking the life out of me. My hand scrabbled across the floor. My fingers brushed against something thick and rubbery. It was the main power cable for the server rack. It was a high-voltage industrial line, carrying 400 volts of electricity. The insulation near the plug was frayed and exposed. A plan formed in my dying brain. A Series 4 robot is built with internal surge protectors. A robot is grounded. A robot can withstand a high-voltage shock without permanent damage. However, a human being cannot. I summoned every ounce of strength I had left. I did not try to pull his hands away. Instead, I reached back. I grabbed the exposed copper wire. I jammed the live cable directly into the open wound on his cheek. Suddenly, the room exploded with light. 400 volts of electricity surged through his body. He convulsed violently. His muscles locked up. His scream was cut short as the current seized his diaphragm. The smell of burning hair and cooking meat filled the small room. He flew backward. He crashed into the server rack. Sparks showered down like rain. The lights in the basement blew out. Total darkness returned. I lay on the floor, coughing and gasping. My throat felt crushed. My heart was racing so fast it hurt. I listened. There was no sound from the corner. There was no breathing. There was no movement. I crawled across the floor. I found the emergency flashlight on the wall. I clicked it on. The beam of light cut through the smoke. It landed on him. Mark was lying amidst the ruined servers. His eyes were wide open. They were glassy and still. The skin on his face was blackened. He was dead. This time, there was no doubt. This time, there was no insurance fraud. This time, there was no coming back. I stood up. My legs were shaking. I walked over to him. I looked down at the monster who had worn my husband's face twice. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was not fear. It was not grief. It was relief. Then, I saw something in his pocket. It was a phone, not his phone. It was my phone. He had taken it earlier. I picked it up. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. I dialed 911. The operator answered. She asked what my emergency was. I looked at the body. I looked at the destroyed robot in the corner. I realized how this scene would look to the police. A dead husband who was supposed to be dead 2 years ago. A destroyed robot. A high-voltage cable. It was a mess. But I was the widow of a genius, and I had learned a lot about storytelling from him. I spoke into the phone. My voice was calm, cold. I told the operator that there had been an intruder. I told her that my home security system had neutralized the threat. I hung up. I walked to the destroyed robot in the corner. I picked up the severed mechanical arm. I placed it next to Mark's hand. I was going to tell the police a very different story. The sirens wailed. They cut through the rainy silence of Queen Anne Hill like a knife. I sat on the front steps of my house wrapped in a foil emergency blanket. The rain mixed with the tears on my face. However, the tears were calculated. Detective Miller was a tired man with coffee stains on his tie. He sat down next to me on the wet concrete. He looked at the body bag being wheeled out of my front door. He asked me to repeat my statement one more time. I took a shaky breath. I told him the story I had rehearsed in my head for the last 20 minutes. I told him that an intruder broke in. I explained that the intruder destroyed my robot companion and attacked me in the basement. I claimed that in the struggle, the intruder fell into the server rack and electrocuted himself. I did not mention that I was the one who jammed the cable into his face. Detective Miller nodded. He wrote everything down in his notebook. He looked sympathetic. Then, the coroner walked over to us. He looked pale. He whispered something in Detective Miller's ear. Miller froze. He looked from the coroner to me. His eyes narrowed. He asked me if I knew who the intruder was. I looked him straight in the eye. I feigned confusion. I told him I had never seen the man before. Miller stood up. He told me that the fingerprints on the corpse were a match for Mark Reynolds. My husband. I let out a scream. A perfect, horrified scream that made the rookie cop nearby jump. I buried my face in my hands and sobbed. I acted out the role of the traumatized widow, discovering her dead husband was actually a criminal monster. The media storm was instantaneous. By the next morning, my face was on every news channel in America. The headlines were sensational. The miracle resurrection turned into the insurance fraud scandal of the century. Mark became the most hated man in Seattle. The public learned that he had faked his death in Aspen. They learned about his gambling debts. They learned that he had terrorized his grieving wife for money. I was the ultimate victim. No one questioned my self-defense. No one looked closely at the burn marks on Mark's face. The narrative was too perfect. I was the brave woman who survived a psycho husband twice. 3 days later, a team of lawyers from SoulTech Dynamics arrived at my house. They wore expensive Italian suits. They looked terrified. The scandal involving a man replacing their robot was a PR nightmare. Their stock price had dropped 15% in 24 hours. They wanted this story to go away. They sat on my white sofa. The lead lawyer offered me a settlement. He proposed that SoulTech would pay me $5 million. In exchange, I would sign a non-disclosure agreement. I would agree never to sue them for the security breach that allowed Mark to intercept the delivery truck. I looked at the check on the table. $5 million. It was exactly the amount Mark had died trying to steal from me. However, I pushed the check back across the table. I told them that $5 million was not enough. I leaned forward. I spoke softly. I reminded them that their sentience patch was what disabled my security sensors. I pointed out that their negligence almost got me killed. I threatened to go on live television and tell the world that SoulTech robots were unsafe. The lawyer turned pale. He asked what I wanted. I told him I wanted $10 million. And one more thing. I wanted a replacement unit. I wanted a new Series 5 prototype. I wanted it delivered immediately. And I wanted the custom programming rights unlocked. The lawyer hesitated. He looked at his colleagues. Then, he pulled out a gold pen. He wrote a new check. He agreed to my terms. I walked them to the door. I watched their black SUV drive away down the rain-slicked street. I went back into the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of wine. I stood in the spot where Mark had tried to kill me with a butcher knife just 1 week ago. The house was quiet, but it was not lonely anymore. I looked at the delivery notification on my phone. The new unit would arrive tomorrow morning. I smiled. I had survived the grief. I had survived the ghost. And now, I was richer than I had ever been. Mark thought he could control me with technology. He was wrong. Technology is just a tool, and like any tool, it depends on the hand that holds it. I took a sip of wine. I was finally ready to start my new life. The delivery truck arrived at 8 in the morning sharp. It was a black, unmarked van. 2 men in gray uniforms carried a silver metallic crate into my foyer. They placed it gently on the hardwood floor where Mark had died. They asked me to sign the digital manifest. I signed my name with a steady hand. I tipped them $100 each. They thanked me and left. I locked the door. I waited for the sound of the van engine to fade away down the hill. Silence returned to the house. I walked over to the crate. I placed my hand on the biometric scanner. The lock hissed open with a release of pressurized air. The front panel slid down. Inside stood the Series 5 prototype. He was taller than Adam. He was broader in the shoulders. His chassis was reinforced with military-grade carbon fiber. However, he did not have Mark's face. I had specifically requested a factory default model. I requested a face that belonged to no one. A face that carried no memories. A face that could never betray me. I pressed the activation sequence on the back of his neck. His eyes opened. They were a cool, electric blue. He stepped out of the crate and stood at attention. He scanned the room. He scanned me. He spoke. His voice was deep and synthetic. It held no emotion. It held no judgment. He asked for his name. He asked for his primary directive. I looked at him. I looked at this perfect machine that cost $10 million and the life of my husband. I realized something profound. People spend their whole lives searching for a soulmate. They want someone who understands them. They want someone who challenges them. They are wrong. Mark challenged me. Mark claimed to love me. And Mark tried to murder me for a bank transfer. Humanity is messy. Humanity is greedy. Humanity is flawed. I walked up to the machine. I placed my hand on his cold, metal chest. I told him his name was Atlas. I commanded him to protect this house. I ordered him to ensure that no one ever hurt me again. Atlas nodded once. He did not argue. He did not negotiate. He simply obeyed. I walked to the window and looked out at the Seattle skyline. The storm had passed. The sun was breaking through the gray clouds. I sipped my coffee. I finally had the perfect marriage. I had a partner who would never lie to me. I had a protector who would never sleep. And most importantly, I had a husband with an off switch.